Well, Stephen O'Dell of the Ford Motor Company Europe. In your presentation, you said that the general trend has been a decline in demand for motor cars, and we could be at the bottom of the trough. That's debatable, but looking ahead, there is likely to be, most economic indicators suggest, a rise in demand for vehicles and more capacity in the motor industry in Europe. Hoping to peak at 15 million units, I think, by the middle of the decade. Now, that presents challenges because, of course, other countries are manufacturing motor vehicles very efficiently. And you mentioned that to get a level playing field, both regulation and free trade agreements are very important. Perhaps you could just elaborate on the regulation argument.
Sure. Well, just to clarify, when we say more capacity, actually it would be greater use of existing capacity, because the industry has significant underutilised capacity. It probably did even back when the industry was running at 18 million, but it was at a tolerable level for businesses. Okay. When the industry gets to 13 million, it exposes all the rocks, I think. I think it's very important. A couple of things. Firstly, free trade that you mentioned, and secondly, regulation. If you look at all of the elements of the regulation and legislation coming from the EU, actually most of it, you would argue, is reasonable and fair and the right things to do. Lower CO2, low emissions, there are better safety for vehicles. They're the things that we would all want. But our request is that we look at them holistically and determine what's the pace that they would be introduced, both from an affordability from the customer's perspective, and secondly from a ability to compete with the rest of the world. Our estimates estimate that in the past 5 years and the next 5 years, cost of regulation could add, almost double the price of a car. So, and that reduces the number of people who will buy a car. Maybe that's the point of some of the legislation. But I think someone needs to look at it collectively rather than discrete elements to prioritise, if you will, and then decide what's affordable both for the manufacturers, the customers, and it's a global world, as you say. Vehicles are being produced all over the world, and the European industry has to be able to compete in that forum.
In terms of excessive regulation, you said most of them are very commendable and meritorious in terms of reducing carbon emissions and safety, but can you see any easy wins when you see excessive regulation compared with perhaps Asia and the US?
Well, I don't know about easy wins. I think the opportunity is in the pace of deployment. We're having the debate already about CO2 targets for 2020 and beyond, and Europe does appear to want to be at the absolute forefront of the toughest legislation in the world. And that actually means that the investment level, the development level, and then the deployment level is extremely high in Europe, tougher than anywhere else in the world. It would be very helpful if we could get the various regions in the world talking about what's the target in a period of time and actually agree on the glide path towards that target. And of course, if you the only way to get to some of those targets are greater levels of electrification or greater levels of technology. And that's fine if the infrastructure exists. And right now, it doesn't.
Yeah. Right. On a similar point, in your national manufacturing debate keynote today, you mentioned about always connected mobility. And I was very intrigued with that. Certainly, that's an area which is very close to my heart in terms of my own research. How do you see UK's faring in developing new technology and a supply chain to support next generation of connected cars?
Well, I can only principally talk from a Ford experience. And incidentally, I think the vehicle has gone from being something that was connected, that is now, if you like, a hub of your connectivity. Right. People don't want to get into a car and use different levels of connectivity. They want to be exactly connected as they were through their mobile or any other source. Yep. And I said in a Ford, for instance, I can use Sync, which is the Ford system, and I can deploy my MP3 and my system in the car and download text messages, so it's read back verbally to me, so it's not a danger. Okay. And if I'm unfortunate to be in an accident, then that will send a signal immediately to the emergency services. And within Ford, a lot of our development is we have hubs. North America and Germany are the main hubs for us for developing that level of technology. Right. We do have experts in the UK, but the majority of them in the European forum are in Germany. Sure.
Now, being coming from UK manufacturing perspective, I do feel that this is an area we do need to look at very closely and develop capabilities. And that links back to what we are already doing in apprentice scheme, for example. Yeah. And apprentices have to be ready for this next generation of technology that's going to be used.
And flexible.
And being flexible.
The development is moving so fast. You know, the apprenticeships of yesteryear wouldn't be capable of being able to handle that level of demand. And incidentally, the level of apprenticeships in the UK, whilst going up, really need to be greater. They need to be higher. Yeah. They need to be developed in the areas as they develop. You know, who'd have as you said earlier on, the level of connectivity in a vehicle today is 10 times that of a Boeing 10 years ago. Yeah. So it's just moving at such a pace.
But in a way, the greatest software and IT components in a typical family car today should probably play into the hands of the apprenticeship agenda, because I'm not saying there is a problem with attracting young people to do apprenticeships. I think in the last 2 years we've found that there's less of a problem. But if people are still considering, if they're still couching an apprenticeship with traditional craft skills and working in factories and metal bashing, no disrespect, if that's what people are thinking, actually the apprentice of the future will be more akin to a software engineer, a games programmer, and the kind of things that get young people inspired.
The motor industry in Europe has a significant shortage today of electrical engineers, and one country is going to figure that out, and it will develop apprenticeships, training schemes, etc., that enable that capability. And for the next 5 to 10 years, the industry in Europe is going to have a shortage of electrical engineers. So somebody needs to figure that out.
Now, you mentioned of the two key criteria that should really help to engender a more level playing field for European motor manufacturing. We've discussed regulation, the other one being free trade. I think you said in 2011 Japan, was it the US and the EU devised a
No, it was Korea and the EU, and the data actually says that since that period Europe has exported in that 3-year period about 200,000 vehicles to Korea, and Korea has imported into Europe over 1 million. And that doesn't feel like a very level playing field, especially since Korea did not dismantle its non-tariff barriers that it said it would. In fact, as we speak, it's erecting new ones to disable imports into that country. And like Japan, it has the ability to manage its exchange rate. And that's not Ford absolutely accept, acknowledge, want free trade. We export about 80% of the vehicles we build around the world, but it has to be balanced free trade, and that's not balanced. Japan has massive surplus capacity. In a managed environment with a managed currency. If Europe goes ahead and agrees a free trade agreement with Japan, and Europe has massive overcapacity, where do we think that capacity will come?
Yeah. And I think this is where our foreign policy and our relationships with other governments needs to be judged based on reality, and government has a strong act to play.
Absolutely. And my comments are not anti-Japanese, they're after a level playing field.
Yeah, and I think we have to uphold that.
Okay.
Let's assume just for a second that in the case of Korea they don't relax these trade barriers very quickly. What are the European car companies doing to circumvent that problem or to overcome it? And perhaps I'm alluding to better engineering and more attractive products. I mean, what are we doing to make European-made cars more attractive to an Asian marketplace?
Well, I think the world is becoming a global market. People are expecting similar services, similar products. And the Europeans are absolutely, in many respects, at the forefront of technology development. An awful lot of, you mentioned the supply base. The supply base for the automotive industry is European-based. Some of it in the UK, a lot of it in Germany, very highly technical. So on a relatively high labour cost per unit, They've actually innovated to the point where a lot of the technical aspects from a vehicle come from those arenas. But it's got to, if you go back to the political forum, it's got to go back to that European market, be it 13 million, be it 18 million, Korean market, maximum 2 million, a complete disadvantage on managed exchange, a complete disadvantage on tariffs. What will happen, unfortunately, is whilst we can innovate with surplus capacity, it will mean that people will have even greater surplus capacity. And it will result in people having to reduce that surplus capacity, in my mind unnecessarily so, because of a disadvantaged level of competition. And at that point, the governments need to facilitate that rather than stand in its way.
Yes.
So not facilitating or delivering on a free trade agreement that's multilateral really could have a significant impact on jobs in the automotive market.
Massive, of course it will. And people have to recognise that implication. You can't, lots of governments are saying, okay, we understand you have to restructure, but not here, right? Not here. Well, you have to do it where your footprint is. And you have to do it in a way that's respectful. But you also have to, remember, in Ford, we've put billions of dollars in the design and engineering of powertrains. So we see the UK as being a development, engineering and export source for engines around the world. 1/3 of the engines, Ford's engines anywhere in the world, are actually built in the UK.
Well, yeah. Well, let's hope that continues to be a world fulcrum for engine manufacturing. I suppose we could just perhaps finish, Stephen, on people. You mentioned that in your presentation that people are always at the heart of manufacturing and innovation. And you mentioned an engineering body's report that said that UK needs to produce about 50,000 engineering graduates per year.
Yep.
To fulfil the manufacturing opportunities and needs, and it's probably producing at the moment about 23,000.
About half of the number.
About half the number, and that's a pretty serious shortfall. I know certainly from my experience with Ford of Britain, Joe Greenwell, the company in Dagenham there does a fantastic job with engaging with schools, graduate programs, etc. But what more is your company doing, perhaps beyond in Britain and beyond, to encourage more engineers to get into manufacturing?
Well, we are still bringing people into our engineering centres. I think our R&D centre in the UK is one of, if not the largest automotive and one of the largest R&D centres in the UK. It also designs and engineers transits for the world, which is now a global product as well. And we've got a continued flow of hiring in from universities. We also take apprentices on as well. But eventually, you look in the hopper and the hopper will be empty. And someone else will fill up the hopper.
Yep.
Someone else will decide, but if I can't get that level of technical capability that I can either grow, nurture or add from the UK, then it needs to be somewhere else. And so I think there's a lot to be done in the grassroots of education, of encouraging people to take scientific, technical education, helping them understand the benefits, even laying out the career benefits at an early age that will garner. Because as you say, the mass manufacturing jobs, it's not that they aren't there anymore, but they're not there at the level they were before.
And they're different, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're just different skills.
Having said that, there is a bit of good news. UK, for the first time in many years, are going to produce 2 million cars. That's prediction for next year.
Yeah.
And that's a positive news. If we can reach that out to students, teachers, and public in general, that will actually boost the confidence of people, and they will begin to get more attracted to manufacturing.
Including, and I said in my speech, I still think some people think of the automotive industry as a smokestack industry. Well, it's not. It's now a vehicle, is a connected capability.
Yeah.
It's got, it's more about connectivity than combustion, as I said before. And the development is just so much fun, and there's so much advanced engineering, and it's a growing business.
Yep.
Now, 80 million cars sold worldwide this year, 100 million by the end of the decade. So it's absolutely a growth industry.
That story needs to be told to the schools and the universities.
It's an opportunity.
More and more. Well, Stephen Odell from the Ford Motor Company Europe and Raj from Cranfield, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.